Hello guys, in this video we will try to understand how can we run multiple asynchronous function using async await syntax. In previous lecture we have seen the promises and we understood that to run multiple promises we have to use promise chaining. In that promise chaining we have to just return a asynchronous function through then method and we capture output of this other asynchronous function through next then method and so on. In fact, we can also improve this code using async await function. So let's see how can we achieve that. So the first thing we must understand is that we use async await syntax for promises only. So if our asynchronous function returns us promise, then we can use async await utility. So for that let's create a simple example. Let's say we want to run this 3 asynchronous function inside one function. Say I'll create one function. Let's call this function as run all async code. And what I need to do is that I just want to run all this asynchronous code through this function. So for that I will just run all async code. Now here the question is that how can we use async await syntax. So for that, for every function we want to run many asynchronous function inside. For that the function we are running must be put async at front of that function. Okay, and whatever the asynchronous code we need to call, we just have to put await at front of the asynchronous functions we are calling. So I will put await in front of every asynchronous function. So this is how it is. Now when we call this function will run this function at first, then this function at second, this function at third. But the things which must have to keep in our mind is that we can use this await keyword in async function only. You cannot use await keyword without async. Now let's catch the output of every asynchronous function inside variable so that we can print the data coming from every asynchronous function. So I'll say let a is equal to this, let b is equal to asynchronous function 2, and let c is equal to asynchronous function 3. And what I'll do, I will console the output of every asynchronous function next to that function. So the result of asynchronous function will be printed right here. For the second asynchronous function we will print that result here, and for the third one result will be here. So for now let's commit all this code we done via promise chaining. Now all we have to do is just run this code. Once I call this code, let's see what happens. I run this code and it waits for 1 second and it gives us output number 1, then number 2, then number 3. This function run as same as promise chaining, since the syntax is far more simpler than this promise chaining. So this is what we can achieve through async await function. We can even modify this function using async await also. So for that I will just commit this async await code. I will uncommit this code. Now the thing is that, as I said, asynchronous function only run under the promises. So when we call this function and we call then method, we get a promise. So what we can do, we can just use async for this function and inside this function, whatever the functions we want to call, we can call, like this asynchronous function 2, we can call using await, and we can call others also using await. Now we don't need this then and catch block. We can directly console log the output of every method. Now if I run this code, from then we get promise, and as asynchronous function run under the promise, we can call the function inside as asynchronous function, and we can gather all the data of asynchronous function and upcoming asynchronous function using await keyword. So if I run this code also runs properly. The second thing we must have to understand is that when you use await keyword in front of any asynchronous function, our program will try to execute line by line, that it will wait to execute this asynchronous function too. Once this code execute, the control of execution skip on this function, and then we run this function. This is how asynchronous function work.